Welcome to another edition of Inside the War Room. Ryan Ray here, as always. So good to have you. Today's guest is, as you saw in the headline title, whatever, Desmond Shum, author of Red Roulette. Chinese billionaire escapes China. We talk about kind of his childhood, growing up, and ultimately what happened with his ex-wife now, and what's happened since the book was released, which is quite interesting in and of itself. Before we get to that, let's talk about a couple things. First, Ryan recommends. I'd been reached out. I'd been reached out. They reached out to have Desmond on the podcast. On the same day, I was reading Bill Bishop's newsletter, which is the premium #1 top undisputed champion of the world, the GOAT of GOAT China not podcast newsletters sound system. So I'll link to that below. That is Ryan recommends because, of course, Bill covered the book in his newsletter. So it's kind of funny. I was preparing for the interview, or scheduling the interview at least, and here is Bill Bishop, of course, as always, days ahead of all things China. So be sure to check out his newsletter. I will link that below. I used to have some free, a couple of free passes. I don't think I have any more. If I do, I'll put those down there as well. But be sure to check out Bill Bishop's newsletter. It comes out 4 times a week, and then an open thread on Fridays. Seriously, it is the best stuff on China there is, at least from the English-speaking perspective. Maybe there's some more Mandarin or something that I can't read, but as far as English, it's the best. With that being said, sponsor time. Cheesy face, right? Okay. For those listening, you missed all that, but whatever. Let's talk about our sponsor, which is Bluehost, who hosts all of my podcast. Is Bluehost. I'll give you $2.95. How about that? Okay, I'm not giving it to you. They are. Whatever. Don't let the facts. RyanRaySenior.com/hosting. That's RyanRaysr.com/hosting. Register today. If you do, send me a screenshot of you checking out using my code, and I will give you a promo on this podcast. There you go. It's that easy. We'll cut out a little time to promote your website or whatever it is that you're doing. And so be sure to use my link, RyanRaysenior.com/hosting. Now, the thing about this guest in this interview, in this book, is that you don't get a lot of dissidents of this stature coming out from mainland China or Hong Kong, right? You get some, but not at this level. And the thing that's so important is whatever you want to think about the book or what was said in the book, the CCP responded in a way. So his wife, who's been kidnapped for 4 years, I believe, was released briefly when the book came out. So for all those that say the CCP doesn't care about world, anything outside its borders or press or media, whatever, that's hogwash. They do. Here's proof. 2, the fact they released this lady for at least a few days, we'll see what happens, is an astonishing turn of events. And hopefully she'll get a full release. Obviously, it's a terrible situation. Feel bad for their son, who may never see his mother again. And so, anyways, it's a fascinating story. Pick up the book. I'll leave a link below in the show notes. With that, let's get to my interview with Desmond Shum. Well, Desmond, it's lovely to have you on the program. How are you doing?
Very good, very good. Well, as good as it can be, I guess, these days. So much things happening.
Well, yeah, so let's get into that. We talked about the book in the introduction, but and so part of the book's premise is that your ex-wife went missing. We were supposed to record on Monday. Today's Thursday, because over the weekend she reappeared, is what the word is. What happened?
Well, what happened was, my book came out on Tuesday. I picked the day because it's almost to the date of disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
And then on last Friday, Wall Street Journal and Financial Times both carry a story of my upcoming book and the story of her missing. And on Saturday, Saturday their time, she reappeared. I mean, she called my cousin, she called my mom, because it's the middle of night for me in England. And I got my phone off overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom and then so my cousin messaged me, said Whitney has called them, and they asked me to call her back. And I mean, obviously, I wake up very early that day, just hard to sleep, with all these things happening anyway. So I wake up like 5 something, and I got the message. My drawer, dropped to the floor, and I called her around 6. And then apparently what happened was, from what cut me if it's short if I'm talking too long. What happened was, they put her on a, well, this is all what she told me. She signed a paper of temporary release, so they let her out on Saturday, Beijing time, and then she made contact.
Now, in the book, I'm trying to see here, you mentioned the department that you think was responsible for her kidnapping. Do you? I'm trying to. It's early in the book. I don't have it underlined, but do you still think it's that part of the CCP who's the one responsible? Did she give you any indication about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's no doubt about it. I mean, she was first put restricted to travel outside of country 6 months prior her abduction, and at the time she was disappeared by the state. 3 other colleagues of hers also were taken, and those ones, none of them, for all 4 of them, none of them ever been charged. So those ones reappear sometime early last year. So they basically went into a dark cell for 3 years, re-emerged, never been charged, and released. She came out like the day after the story broke on Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal.
So let's talk about kind of leading up to this event. In the book, you kind of retrace your childhood, going to the Big Ten, swimming, kind of moving around mainland China to Hong Kong. And in the book, you talk about not only what it was like to kind of grow up under Mao from your perspective, how your parents, how they saw what was happening, and that's one thing that I think Americans have a hard time trying to grasp, is trying to project what a person in mainland China or in Hong Kong thinks about the government. And so maybe unpack that, because as I'm going through the book, I'm thinking about what your parents said, and how that has to be tough to go through the business world knowing that there's these boundaries and this corruption and stuff. So what was it like growing up under Mao? You talked about the day you died. What was that like? And how did that impact your decisions in life and business?
You mean my parents' experience?
Well, yeah. So yes, yeah.
My parents, well, I mean, as I talk about in details in the book, my parents had a very tough. Well, I mean, everybody has it tough under the Cultural Revolution under Mao. It's especially tough on my father, because his family is categorized as the black category, which is like sort of cast into the bottom of society, because my grandfather was a lawyer prior to the Chinese Communist takeover of China, and so he was very early on, as he was a teenager, their family was driven away from their home in Shanghai, driven to a city which is probably at that time a 3-hour train ride. And then he was left alone in Shanghai because he was attending school. And then, as a teenager, he was going to relatives' house, from different relatives' house, trying to, sort of feed himself with, what the relative would provide for him. At the time, food is scarce for everybody. So, and then he's always very afraid throughout, his until he left China around 40 years old. He's always afraid because he's cast into this black category. He may, any political movement, which were many in China at that time, will pull him into it, and then we will, suffer further. So, and then being categorized into the black category, tells, restricts what kind of school you can go to, what kind of universities you may attend, and what kind of job the government assigned to you. And they actually essentially kept what you possibly can promote it into. So it's a tough experience, especially on my father, I think.
Yeah. How much do you think growing up under Mao, how much do you think you were impacted by your parents having a Mao-like regime? You talk about the relationship that you had with them, that constant downward pressure coming from a very top-heavy government. Do you think that impacts, because you sound like how you were parented, you talk about how other kids were allegedly parented as well. Do you think that's part of the totalitarian communist kind of system?
I think actually, at the time, I don't understand, oh, my parents actually was, given the job by the state because of, their caste. And also, I wasn't aware of, how they're being treated in the society at large. What I have actually left a lasting mark on me, and it's one of that reason actually today, I come out and publish this book. Is when I was a child in the 70s, growing up in Shanghai, we were indoctrinated. We were indoctrinated very early on. We were fed with those comic books. We're talking about how the communists defeated nationalists, overtaking China. Actually, there's a lot of books that are talking about the communists fighting the Americans in the Korean War. I still remember actually, it was built up as a national hero, how he threw himself in front of the machine guns in the Korean War with Americans in order to blow them up with a grenade. So it's like the message was you sacrifice yourself for the state, you sacrifice yourself for the quote unquote greater good. And that actually have a lasting impression on me, because I do think what I'm doing is sacrificing myself for the greater good. And I'm willing to do it because part of it, ironically, is what the communists gave me.
What was it like when Mao died?
What was like,
When Mao died?
it was funny. I mean, I remember I was a kid, in a primary school, very young. I think at Mao died, I was probably 8. And, I don't understand anything, like Paramount leader died. And then we were sitting there listening to the national broadcast over the radio. And the teacher, who was in front of class, started crying. We kids don't know anything. The teacher crying seems like very touching and moving, and the whole damn class was stuck crying and together with her.
Right.
And that was that. And then we go out and play, right? I mean, we're kids, 8 years old, and I was, I remember, and I wrote about in an episode, that episode in the book. I went out play, and I was reprimanded by the teachers, like, you shall now play, you shall now be loud, and you shall now have laughter, because Mao has died. And it's like, oh, well, I remember that episode.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the U.S. in my lifetime we haven't had a president die. So thinking about, or at least an active president die. So thinking about what that would feel like as a young kid. But the magnitude of Mao was so different that even at a young age he had to have a large presence. And so I'm sure it kind of, even though you might not have understood what was going on, your parents and do you say the right thing, the wrong thing? Probably a lot of tension there after his death as well.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
So so you kind of move around as you grow up. You mentioned Shanghai. You moved down to Hong Kong. Maybe break down real quick for people who aren't familiar with the difference back then between mainland China and Hong Kong. It was very much a culture shock from a language standpoint for you, but also from a just economic standpoint.
Oh, on everything. I mean, I left Shanghai when I was 10. My parents didn't even tell me, I was moving, like permanently leaving Shanghai. They were like, "Oh, you are going on a trip, with us to this place called Hong Kong." So I was the first time for me to get our airplane to get to, to fly to the border of Hong Kong and China. And I remember I had my first Coke, before crossing the border into Hong Kong. And at the time, I still remember, it's like, damn, I never taste something like this, because I said, this is so bad. What the heck, they're selling this for money.
Right.
So, yes. And then, my mom crossed the border with something like $2 US in her pocket. And, we went to join the relatives there. I remember it was 1, 2, 3, 4, eventually it was 8 people living in a 700 square feet apartment. It was tough. Looking back, we say it's tough, but as a kid, you're like, okay, this is life. You roll along with it. But I didn't thought it was tough at the time. That's just life, right? So.
Yeah. Did you find it a reprieve to kind of get away from your dad? I think you were away from him for a year or two. What was that experience like? Because those are influential years for a young man.
A relief, definitely a relief. I mean, as I told in the book, I mean, my dad, I think, I don't think he consciously took it out on me, but I think subconsciously he faced so much pressure in a society in China that, I was, that's my interpretation. He subconsciously took it out on me and then took it out hard on me
Yeah. And your dad has a
when I
nice
have it. Sorry.
Yeah, I say your dad has a nice, at least financial redemption story. It seems like later on in life he was very, very successful and was able to kind of um, get past some of those skeletons in the closet with Tyson and some of the land deals he did. So, did that change his temperament later on in life?
Well, I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, but with now I'm living with 8 people, you don't beat up your kids in open, like that, right? And I
Right.
was getting bigger. Put it that way too.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, you're 6'5", I believe, right?
Yeah, I'm 6'5", 230 pounds.
Right. And so in China, and so in the US that stands out. In China, that really stands out. And so I think the average height there is what,
Yeah,
5'7", something like that.
yeah, I'm like head and shoulder, taller than my peers from like early age.
Yeah. And so you as you're growing up, you start swimming. And it's interesting. I don't know a lot about swimming. I know how to swim, but competitive swimming, I don't know a lot about it. I've heard like Michael Phelps talk about it, or some of the Olympic athletes talk about it, and the dedication that they have to kind of put into it to be good. It seems like you kind of flirted with the dedication, but also were slacking off. But it also kind of formed you as you were growing up to maybe learn some responsibilities that you were able to capitalize on later in life.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, it's interesting. Is the first thing how I get into swimming. I get into swimming not because my interest, like in the States, it's like, you dive into the pool, you like the, you like the activity, and eventually become a swimmer because you like it, right? In communist China, I was 6 years old, and I'll get selected because I'm like taller than the rest, and some coach come into my primary school and then sort of measure you up, right? And then they say, oh, you are good for swimming, you are good for dancing, and then you just like throw into the squat. And then so I start training very early on. Since 6 years old, I swim 1 to 2 hours every day when since 6 years old. And the swimming, the looking back, the swimming, what it gave me is tenacity.
Mm.
I'm willing, as I, talk about in the book. I mean, you get to train 1 or 2 hours a day, like, every day. And then, some of the days you just low energy. You just don't have the energy to really pick it up. And then, but swimming pool, people doing laps, the moment you're slowing down, your mates like touching your feet. It's like, hey man, you're blocking the lane, go faster, don't block me. And you have to push yourself, right? And also, and then eventually get out of the pool, at the end of the training. So you just so the morale of my takeaway was, eventually you get out of the pool, you will
Mhm.
survive it. And that is what that's a lesson that I took it away from my swimming days, and then
Yeah,
the last one of my.
yeah, I would say there's two things there. One, you talk about getting at the pool, and I think that's just in business and life that we sometimes kind of project this never-ending thing, and that's just not how it
Yeah,
works. There will be an end point. It might be a bad end point. You might have to
yeah,
crawl at the
yeah,
pool. You might be hurting, but something will end, and so you can start over. And
yeah,
tenacity. That's I use that word in business to. When I'm talking like young salespeople, they're really struggling. I'm like, you got to have tenacity, and it doesn't mean you're going
yeah,
crazy like the Tasmanian devil. It means that you have to be persistent. You have to go be above and beyond. And so many
right,
people, it seems like they want to succeed in life and business, and they just don't have that extra just tenacity to go after it.
right. And then yeah, I'm completely agree with you. And then the other thing I sort of adopted for my life is I got this saying somewhere, in a book somewhere. He said that how you judge a person's life is not where you start in life, and it's not where you end in life. It's the distance you travel in between.
Mm.
And that's a saying I really adopt to my life. It's you think about it. What's the longest distance you can have in between the 2 points? It's a lot of up and downs,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
That enriches your life,
Mm.
right? Obviously, you have to survive the downs,
Mhm.
but that's a human experience. Of our life experience. It's just it's a journey.
Hmm.
The more you can see and the more you can possibly do along the journey is the best it is. It's not a one way street up. Everybody's a lot of people I think look for it as like strict line up, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's like that's the
Hmm.
best way to go. That is not the best way to go. Live an enriched life.
Yeah. So you come to the U.S. We talked about this a minute ago. Come to Big Ten. You go swim for Wisconsin. You're in the U.S. Obviously, that's a different culture as well. So you kind of have a couple different cultural moments growing up, and I think that's also important to point out is that sometimes people they live in one area and it's not a detriment to them, but it just shapes how they view the world. You had mainland China, which is going to be under Mao until you're 8. You leave at 10. Then you go to Hong Kong. You're kind of the lower class citizen, if you will. There, you're struggling, but it's a different environment, different language, and then you come to the U.S. and Wisconsin, which is, you know, kind of a different culture
Culture,
from where I'm at, and
culture
you want
shock.
to go to California, which is not, which is a different culture altogether. So, going from place to place, meeting different people, hearing different perspectives. I always tell people international travel is my favorite thing to do. It's mainly because I get to hear
Yeah.
people say stuff. I'm like, oh, huh, that's how you view the world. And so, how much before we get to the business stuff? How much do you think that really helped you understand different ways to view things from different perspectives?
Yeah, it really, I mean, it made me what I am, right? I mean, those kind of complexity of you need to deal with every time you move into a new environment. It enriches you and it enhances your tenacity and enhance your adaptability. And then you have to adapt to a new environment, new language, new everything, right? And I've done it multiple times, so happen, not by choosing sometimes. And then it enables me to adapt to different situation. And nowadays, I really am. My wife have a saying that wherever your heart is your home.
Mm,
So
yeah.
it's hard for me. I today I'm probably not after this book come out. I would never go back to China. I would never dare go back to communist China. And obviously, Hong Kong nowadays are untouchables for me too, and that's very very sad. But wherever my heart is my home.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I don't think people realize that from the CCP standpoint, if you criticize them outside of their borders, you could be guilty of a crime. I could be guilty, and you. And it's really weird because I'm not a Chinese citizen, obviously, but under the new security laws, I'm actually could be
They
guilty.
can still charge you as guilty.
Yes, still charge me. So this conversation, which I'm in Texas and you're across the pond there, we could both be guilty by the CCP standpoint, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. And so I do want to get to the CCP influence in a second, but let's talk about the business stuff because you kind of struggle. It seems like kind of getting your gears aligned early in your career. You're trying to figure out what to do. Things aren't necessarily working out like you'd hope for. I was curious reading this because in the US, it's the land of opportunity, right? Everything's open. Did you doubt that maybe China wasn't the right spot for your career long term early on? Did you maybe think, okay, I need to go to the West to be successful?
No, 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 no. I mean, well, first of all, let me look at it. When I was, when I was in college, I was already determined I'm gonna go back to China to try my luck with my career because my parents have, their friends are all like entrepreneurs with a small business. And I've been, since a teenager, I was sitting in their dinners and lunch and listening into their stories, and I'm fascinated by it. I still remember, at that time, you need to like go to page 8 or page 7 or 10 to find a story about China on Wall Street Journal, when I was in a library in Wisconsin. Obviously, today you got a front page all the time. But when and the other thing is that when I first started career, I would say actually doing rather well, because I was working for an American firm in a private equity, and then I was the first batch of private equity people in China, and at the time you can count by a single hand how many firms are active in the Greater China region doing private equity. So, I think in the book I mentioned that the firm, bring Domino Pizza to China. We bring Heineken beer to China. We brought TGI Friday to China. Those early days of China. So I think I was doing rather well. 1997, I was probably 5 years in the firm, 5 years in the firm, 4 or 5 years in the firm. They promote me to be, they call it a chief rep. It's basically I run their, I was sent to Beijing to run their office in Shanghai and Beijing. And so I think earlier in our career, I was doing rather well. Yeah.
Well, didn't you have a spot to where you were working for a private equity group that you doing some
Yeah.
trading that you struggled with?
Actually, the time I was struggle with was when I first left the private equity firm.
Yeah. Okay.
So our year 2000, I decided
Okay.
to try my luck with entrepreneur rank. Because I was looking. I mean, I have coffee with Jack Ma. I think I talk about in the book. I think
Hmm.
first time he came out to raise money, right? And
Hmm.
that's how early I was in this business. And I was, I really feel like I'm standing by the riverbank and seeing the rapid rushing me by, the water rushing me by, and the flow is so strong. And I was like, hey man, I gotta jump in, man. I gotta jump in and see where the flow gonna carry me. It's better that than standing by the riverbank. So about year 2000, I said, well, yeah, the heck of it, I'm leaving this firm. Despite I was doing rather well, and I just joined the entrepreneur rank. I joined a tech company as a senior management, and then was trying my luck. But the first one didn't pan out as planned.
Yeah. Well, that's that's part of the process, isn't it? Right.
Yeah,
Every,
the
like every
initial,
entrepreneur's got a few failed businesses in their closet, so that's just normal.
yeah,
Um,
that's initial.
yeah. So things really seem to take off when you meet which would be your future wife. That's where it seems like you kind of you have an interesting relationship, and I wanted to unpack that for a second there because you talk about her, and you kind of contrast how women normally would be perceived in the business world in China and how she was able to overcome that. Again, for the Western audience here, kind of how did you run into your wife? But then how are women treated, or were they treated at least back then in business, and what was so unique about her that she was able to circumvent that?
We ran into because I was doing a tech firm at the time, and then she was also doing a tech firm at the time. So we were talking about merging the two firms because with the firm I was doing was is a software focus, and then her firm is more hardware sales focus. So we say, well, okay, maybe that's a a combination that if we put the two and two together, it's better for both of us. So that's how we met. We're talking about M&A there, right there. And eventually the M&A of the business didn't happen, but M&A between the two of us happened. So so that was that. And she, in her case, is I think she's extremely good at human relationship management in the China party state environment. She just really, and I mean, truly believe at one stage I was thinking like, damn, I was telling my friends, I was like, this woman's got to be the best networker in the whole damn Beijing. And then that's a huge statement, right? I mean, Beijing is the capital of China. It's all about political power, and the country is all about political power. And to be able to network and then, build those web of complex web of human relationship, it's a skill like no other.
And so you talk about, you say that she was a great networker, and so the immediate thing that people are going to say is, well, okay, it's China, it's corrupt. Obviously, there's under the table bribes or stuff going on. That seemed to be something that she tried to push back on, at least from her perception. How are you able to navigate something like that in China without getting your feet dirty?
I think first thing first, I mean, corruption, rampant corruption, it's one thing. I mean, we are talking about human society, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you still have to connect with on a human basis. This is a
Mhm.
human society. It's not just everything is based on money, right?
Right.
I mean, effectively, actually, the best networker are not the ones who use money. The one use money, it's that's not a networker, right? That's a buyer,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
If you it's only when you can truly build human to human relationship, disregarding material things, that's when you have a true bonding. If
mhm,
you are just bidding on the price, that's not networking. That's not a networker. That's a buyer bidding on the price. That guy pays 1 million. Hey, I am going to pay you 1.5 million. You have no relationship with that person other than number.
mm.
So to start off, and even you start off with a monetary relationship, you always want to try to turn that relationship into a human to human relationship. That's a successful networker. I mean that's globally true anyway, right?
So, what do you think went wrong then? Obviously, we kind of let's go back to where we started at, which is she. It's just one day, boom, she's kidnapped, she disappears. You guys, you go through and link to the book. Kind of how you were growing your business and the kind of the ebbs and flows and all the local people in the tenant houses and all the problems with that. But from the networking perspective, is it just that the CCP has too much power and it overcomes that stuff? What went wrong?
I think the first thing is, I mean, I chronicle and essentially the book is my memoir, so I
Mm,
chronicle my entire life,
mhm,
and then what I want to do is I don't make accusation of any sort in a book.
mhm,
I want to from episode to episode to episode of my experience, what I see, what I did, how do I interact with whom, and then it's from that I want the reader to get to, okay, their judgment of how things work, their judgment of how networking actually work in China, their judgment of who that person really is. That's what I want to do. Okay, so that's a starting point. And then in terms of what went wrong in her case, I mean, as you can see from the book, I mean, we associate with the highest level of political community in China, right? We're dealing with, the family of the premier. We're dealing with ministers. We're dealing with, the top epsilon of the political power. And then in China, it's all about political power. Money counts for nothing, right? That's why a person like Jack Ma, richest person in China, gets silenced, right? And then if you look back into history, um, none, I would say probably none, richest person has ended up well in China because there's no private property protection, and money counts for nothing. In a power in an eye of a political power, it's like, yeah, I silence you, I dispatch you, I get rid of you. So what? I can pop up another entrepreneur to replace you. I can have a Jack Lee tomorrow, Peter Ma tomorrow to be the richest guy running the biggest enterprise in China. That's the way they look at it because, there's no private protection and there's due course of judiciary justice. In terms of her particular case, I mean, we divorced, a few years before her disappearance. So I don't know the precise reason of why she was disappeared. I asked her, I mean, on the first phone call we had, I asked her, what's your charge? You have been taken for 4 years into a dark cell. And, I'm sure her line was untapped, and, if not, somebody sitting right across from her. She said her charge need to be confidential. She cannot disclose what her charge is. So I don't know from precisely why she was taken. But given our previous shared experience and the situation of China, and to my understanding, it is mostly because it's political related. You associate with the wrong crowd, um, learning of the events the paramount leadership doesn't want you to know, and then you become a nuisance. And then they say, well, we will get rid of you. But then it is not a crime to be associated with certain people, and it's not a crime to know certain things. So they just, well, we don't even bother to charge you, just throw into that cell. So, I believe without my book coming out to the world and putting a spotlight on the situation, they wouldn't even let her out on temporary release. Think of it. My book's supposed to come on Tuesday. The news story book on, telling them spotlight is on the situation on Friday, and she appeared on Saturday telling me to cancel the book launch. That's no such coincidence in the world, is it?
Right. So someone might hear this and go, okay, didn't you know this was coming? Like, didn't you guys, you know, how, so we're reading the memoir and we go, okay, but guys, like when the Jack Ma thing happened last year, I was like, yeah, of course that happened. Stuff like this happened. So you feel bad that it happens. Obviously, there's like a child involved and human, so you feel bad. But also, didn't you see this coming? Didn't you know that you're going to fly too close to the sun?
Yes and no, right? I mean, as I, chronicle in the book, I think China started to change after the financial crisis. I mean, I believe the entire system, including the top epsilon of the leadership in China, believe we want to be like the West. We're going to be more democratic. We're going to be more liberal. We're going to have more freedom. And then China was moving in that direction. And the debating point was, the debate was about at what pace should we go about that, right? But financial crisis really changed perspective at the leadership level. Uh, they all of a sudden thinking, hey, man, look at how the West is crumbling. Maybe their model is not that great. Look at us. Asia will have crashed if not China hold up their currency and then didn't depreciate the currency and then held up and then sort of being the dam stopping the flood, the avalanche. And then they say, well, maybe our model is not that bad. And everything just start to change after that. So what Xi Jinping is doing is quickening the pace. But this thing doesn't start with him. That's one point. The second point I really want to emphasize, and I hope the readers get it out of the book, is he is able to do what he's able to do today, in terms of scaling back all the freedoms, in terms of arresting all the human rights activists, in terms of change the constitution at will and make himself the paramount leader for life. And also in that, the joke is like, last 2 weeks, legislating the entertainment industry not to be too overly entertaining, right? If that's such a legislation, it's because the China is a Leninist party state.
Right.
It's that structure which is built in, has been around for 70 years, allow what is happening to happen. So there is a structure issue. This is not just about Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is enabled by the built-in structure.
So you talked about Xi Jinping in the book. You mentioned the financial crisis, and a lot of people kind of point to Xi Jinping's appointment as the shift, and you do predate it there a little bit before. And I don't know, I'm in the minority here, but I do believe it feels like China was heading towards a more liberalized system, not going to be like the U.S., but they were slowly heading that way. In my read today, and this is just my opinion, is that they are concerned, like when the Hong Kong protests were going on. At the end of the day, they're more or less concerned about what's being said. Like that's really more or less what's being said. They don't want the ideas getting out there, and so they have they're trying to control speech, ideas, and so those are the things that they feel very much threatened by. At least that's my outsider's perspective. Would you agree with that assessment?
That is definitely part of it. I mean, that's definitely part of it. I mean, what it is, I mean, a lot of people, saying that, the political leader, right? I mean, they're advocating that, we're going to cooperate with China when we can all cooperate. We're going to face them up straight up when we need to stand strong. And, that's a joke because China sees U.S. and the Western model as a sworn enemy. Reason being, they have, 70 years of Chinese Communist Party rule. We never have a real election, right? And they know deep down, a very conscious way, their power is illegitimate. That's why within their own society, they want to crash all possible dissent. The internet is blocked. Even the term universal value is unsearchable in China. And if human rights activists get arrested, and they want to control the storyline. That's why my book is so damning, because it broke the storyline. I'm telling a different story. I'm revealing truth they would never want you to know. And obviously, I'm sure I'm going to pay a price for it. And but it's that deep paranoia that's what bringing them to confront the world. Until the world is put under they have the world under their thumb, they're not going to back off, because that's a potential threat to their ruling. I mean, and they intend to hold on to power in China forever, right? Why are they so eager to crush Taiwan? Because they keep saying, cultural differences. We Chinese don't really need democracy. We have 3,000 years history. That's why we have cultural differences. Democracy doesn't work in the model. But Taiwan proved differently. Hong Kong has proven differently, right? And then they crushed the Hong Kong. They are on to Taiwan because they're going to wipe out any possible dissent. And then Hong Kong is a living example of where Chinese culture can be differently operating and very, very successful. And Taiwan, the same case. Those are the immediate doorstep. They crush that. It's coming for you.
You've been around a lot of high-ranking CCP officials. I always joke that if you follow the CCP on Twitter, the propaganda is unbelievable. It's on point. It's the same message over and over again. And you have to be careful, because if you forget, you will interpret that as the truth, right? You'll say, oh, this is what China says, therefore that's what they believe. Someone who's an insider, how do you dissect the news, the official state news? How do you read it? How can you tell when they're bluffing, when they're being honest, when they're being deceptive? How do you discern that?
The first thing we do is, I just give example. I in a book I chronicle how I build the biggest airport logistic project in China, right? So it's probably one of the biggest one in the world. And because I'm doing such an infrastructure and a government-related project, I always need to pay attention to the political wind. And the wing of like when a paramount leader give out statements, what they are giving is indications where things gonna possibly turn. And then the entire bureaucracy is doing the same thing I was doing. Is that they're trying to read into the statements and the policies and say, well, where is what's his preference? How is it going to turn? And then we crowd ourselves, rush to prove ourselves that, well, we are following the flag. The flag is going west. We are all going west, and then we're going to write up all kind of reports to prove, and we are going the direction of the flag. So there is a lot of that. And then in terms of propaganda, the speech to the outside, it's very different. I mean, the Chinese they have a facade, right? It's a very much a facade. So you got a lot of people who came to China. They said, oh, I know that who and who very, very well. It's like, if you read a book, you can see the officials how they behave with us. It's none of none of the story you heard it from any Westerners, right? Because I give example, right? I mean, the moment you go into a dining room with a Chinese official, how you enter the room, where which seat of the table are you going to take? Because there is like very specific seating arrangement. Everybody know immediately where they sit based on the ranking of the political power. And then there are other subtlety related to it. But everybody within that system knows very well where they should be sitting. If you're not, you don't know that. And then when you knock wine glasses, how you knock the wine glasses? because the junior official or somebody who's more junior, they keep lowering the glass. So the glasses, when you knock, the higher ranking guy will hold it up high. The lower ranking guy will knock it down. And sometimes they just want to be show humility. So they keep lowering the glass until almost the glass goes to the floor, and two of them cannot lower it anymore. They lock the glasses on the floor, something like that. But so there a lot of subtlety in human interaction, and through those same subtlety, we immediately on the inside immediately know how much you know the game. Are you one of us? And the moment we know you notice you're not one of us, we talk a completely different language. We share completely different information. So it's a very different situation in China. Everything is, especially in Beijing, it is very politically centric. Everything is behind doors. I have one story in a book. This huge hotel, Beijing hotel, one of the biggest hotel in Beijing. They have an entire floor of private rooms. And then senior ministers, because the hotel is right next to Tiananmen Square, it's very convenient for all these senior officials to gather. But then they manage in such a way that nobody run into each other. So all private rooms has their own toilets, and so they don't need to go out of the room whatsoever. And then the service people make sure, one room is leaving, they will slow down the dishes, to bring the check later and all that. Just make sure you stay in the room until the other room already left. Then, get into the car and then speed away already. Then they let you out of the room. I mean, there's such privacy because why? Because everything is behind the facades, everything is behind curtain, everything is behind closed doors. And I'm telling you, my book is blowing that open.
Well, what did you expect the CCP's reaction to be?
Well, it's quite a reaction, right? You just spy my ex for 4 years, and then the second day major spotlights on her case, they let her out to call me to cancel the book launch, right?
Have you heard from any CCP officials praising you for releasing the book?
I have no. I mean, actually, I intentionally cut all my interaction because with them, because I don't want to jeopardize any of them safety, right? I mean, I'm a dangerous person now. I mean, association with me is dangerous. So I intentionally cut all those contact with them in the last few months, preparing for the book's launch. But I heard it from different people. They're saying, "Oh man, what a brave man telling a true story."
Are you worried about your safety?
Yeah, for sure.
What about your sons?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is no joke, man. I always say, not always say, but I thought about it, and I think, I said, well, if you can take a woman and throw into a dark cell for 4 years. I mean, she tell me herself in the first call. She have no outside news over the last 4 years. She doesn't know her mom passed away in June. She doesn't know a pandemic is going on around the world for 2 years now. I mean, that's a party state capable of all evils.
So when I think about your story, or I'm thinking about the Jack Ma story last year, he went off the grid, whatever that means, last year. There's all kinds of speculation about, do you know where he was last year?
Do I know where he was last year?
Mm-hmm.
No, I haven't been to China since my disappeared.
But he was gone, and people started speculating. And one of the things that was talked about was how hard it is to get your money out of China when you're leaving. They have a very tight grip on the banking system. I know some expats who've worked there who still have money in China that they can't get out. Yeah. How are you able to navigate those streams as you were making your exit?
Things really change I mean, one of the reason, I detail in the book is, I have divorced and I have fights with my ex, is we see the different path of China. I was like, this is not going to go well. I mean, let's move our money out and invest internationally, diversify our portfolio. She believes in China is going to go strong still, and we should concentrate our bets in China. So we have very different view of where China is going. And then I think in the last few years, especially I think starting about I left about 2015, and then just around that time, they really tightening the grips in terms of getting money move around. Nowadays, for $10,000 US bank transfer between any entity, the bank need to have a record of it. And then now introduce a digital currency. A lot of everything in China now is being done online. That's makes all the money traceable. And once they have that in place, that's when they really crack down on the private entrepreneurs because, hey, you have no escape route.
Right. Okay. What would you say to someone right now who is, for some reason, outside of mainland China, average citizen, and they're trying to determine, do I go back or not? Do I go back to China? Is it worth the risk? Is it a safe place to go? What would your advice to them be?
Are you talking about Chinese citizen?
Yes,
Or are you
Chinese
talking
citizen
about
who's happens to be outside of the mainland at this moment, and they're trying to they're thinking, should I go back or not?
well, first of all, you're not allowed back at this moment. And China is in lockdown still
Right, they're
because of the
lockdown, right?
pandemic. They
But they're going to open
suspend
back up at some
everything.
point. You'd assume.
Yeah, that's another thing. But yeah, but at the moment you can't even go back, right?
Right. So if you're thinking about it, and futuristically, would you plan on going back? If not you obviously, but would you advise people to go back, or would you say no, you're out, stay out?
I think the first thing is very, very important. I mean, I talked to some of the young kids who are going to school here and then thinking about are they staying, are they going back? It's get the real news. Many of them are stuck on this WeChat. It's this Chinese, the
Yeah.
ever-present Chinese communication app, and they get the news from that, and it's all fake news.
Right.
And it's a CCP direct news stories. And it's get your news and get your analysis and read the situation. Get the real read of the real situation, then you make your calls, right? But first of all, a lot of them they believe whatever they read on the WeChat, and they don't read any other source, and that's dangerous.
Yeah, the WeChat phenomenon is quite dangerous. I know some folks who they're I don't know if concern is the right word, but they're troubled by their friends or family or relatives, and that they can't break loose of the WeChat. And
Yeah,
it's so weird for someone like myself on this podcast. We have on people we're willing to have on all perspectives. We want to have a long form
right.
conversation. We try to be friendly, try to have a discussion, try to ask some good
Sure.
questions and go through it. But that's not allowed in China. So it's not that on this
Yeah,
show we're necessarily saying this is the truth or not. We're just trying to talk about perspectives.
yeah,
And
yeah,
when you're being funneled one perspective only and you can't deviate outside of that,
yeah.
the psychological impact, it can be damaging.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And then the other issue is it's very difficult to have a rational conversation with those people.
Mm,
And and I'm talking about like almost entire nation. It's because you only you and I can have a rational conversation because we look at many different perspectives, and we have a general understanding of facts, and then we have, but on the same set of facts we have different perspective,
right.
right? And then we can debate, we can argue, and we can share. But with the mainland Chinese, they only know one set of facts fed by the CCP, right? And then, like just a general, example, we defeated America in the Korean War. Really? It depends how you read it, right? American lost a few thousand, you lost probably a few 100,000, right?
Right.
So what do you mean you defeated? I mean, American, the North Korea overrun the South Korea, and American help the South Korean to push back out, to the original border.
Right. Right.
So they are fed with one set of facts, and then it's a Communist Party dictator fact. So when you have a discussion with them, your starting point is not my perspective, your perspective. It's because we have different facts.
Mhm.
we need to go back and straighten out what is true first before we can share perspective and debate perspective. And that becomes impossible because we're not talking about, facts like last week happened. They got indoctrinated one set of facts over their entire life. Where do I start when I have a discussion with a person like that?
Right. Okay. Just a few minutes left here. Let's talk about the book from the media publishing standpoint. In the U.S. right now, there's a big debate with Hollywood about the films, what they can produce, the CCP's influence on that. Did you find it hard to find a publisher willing to publish your book because of some kind of CCP influence?
No, not my book, but I have a friend who is in documentary production. He's one of the better producer in documentary. He was telling me, I was having lunch with him a few weeks back. He was telling me Apple wouldn't buy any documentary related to China.
Yeah, I bet.
Just to give an example, I was stunned. I was like, obviously I don't know that business. I was like, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a documentary called, I think it's In the Same Breath, and it talks about the coronavirus. It documents kind of I think it's a Chinese national who's the director. It's a lady, if I remember correctly, and it's supposed to come out, and it's never come out. So, so you haven't had any problems with book publishing or media events or stuff, because it's always kind of hard to decipher how much is that the CCP narrative, the fear mongering versus the CCP is really influencing the media in Hollywood in the U.S.
Yeah. In the case of my book, I haven't really encountered that.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Okay, so the book is again Roulette. We'll link to that in the show notes. We'll follow your story, of course. Hopefully, your wife will be released. I don't know how you even put that in odds, because it's so hard to know how the CCP will respond, how they will react. And I guess I think I asked you at the beginning. You are convinced it was her. So it's some kind of voice alteration computer thing. Like, you were convinced it's her, right? Yeah. And so hopefully they'll let her out and release her back into, I guess, mainland. They won't let her go outside of China, obviously.
Okay. She's not gonna. They're not gonna let go of China, because what if she come out and say, tell the truth, like, wow, what I did? Whoa.
Well, thank you for your time and for getting this done, and we'll be following the story in the future.
Well, thanks for having me. Good to talking to you.